And at the time, not having guns infringed for townspeople who had to travel back and forth by horseback, that was the means for them to provide for the security of a free state. Now, back then, if they knew that their local gunsmith or their armory was getting guns taken by criminals, by insane people, by terrorists, they wouldn't say, oh, Second Amendment, nothing we can do about it. They would have done about it. They would have said, we got to stop guns from getting into the wrong hands. And they would have taken action. And year after year after year, we've asked you to at least let us have this conversation on the legislative floor. And that's what we're doing now. We know just a couple months after the testimony on this bill last year that a gun trafficking ring was busted right here in Virginia. Dozens of people were arrested, and they were recorded on the phone saying they are taking advantage of Virginia's weak gun laws. We know this is a problem. I've heard from gun rights activists, they said, oh, private sales don't happen in gun shows. Governor McAuliffe then had voluntary background checks. Private gun sellers, not many, maybe just 100 total, but they actually took their private sale and we'd go get a background check at a gun show. So we know that that was misinformation, and surprise, surprise, a felon was denied from this process. But it was just one. What can we learn from that? Well, the state of Washington last year, from August 2017 up until December 2017, they have universal background checks there, and they recorded from the sales that they have there from licensed dealers who performed background checks. They had, in that 5-month period, 1,200 denied sales. So are people taking advantage of the gun show loophole? Yes, they are. The only question that we have now is how many of these felons are applying for NRA membership so they can get free admission to the gun show. Our opposition has called this a gun grabbing scheme. That's just not the case. The background check process is simple. You fill out a form, you check it against a criminal database. If you check out, that's fine. That form is put in a box by the gun seller. That box, after a period of time, is taken to a warehouse in Virginia where it's stored. It's against the law to put it on a computer. By contrast, if you're an NRA member or a VCDL member, your name is put on a registration list of gun owners. And I hope their computer security is strong, because I know a lot of foreign powers would like to get their hands on that information. Finally, and I'm going to go back to New Jersey, which has universal background checks, versus Virginia. Again, from 2014 to 2017, we had 14 and 11 gun deaths, not including suicides. New Jersey, 1,116. The difference in suicides, we have 400 more Virginians committing suicide per year as compared to New Jersey. I refuse to believe that Virginia is a more depressing place to live than New Jersey. Injuries, 3,401 for Virginia, 2,456 for New Jersey. Almost 1,000 more injuries in that time period. Officers shot in that time period, Virginia 33, New Jersey 20. Armed home invasions. Home invasions in which the criminal was armed. Between 2014 and 2017, Virginia had 270, New Jersey 85. And keep in mind, not only New Jersey, but we are the #1 out-of-state provider for New Jersey, the District of Columbia, Maryland, and New York. For the security of the free state, this is a public safety committee. We deserve to have a conversation about universal background checks on the legislative floor. I encourage you to vote yes on this. Thank you.
I think I'm preferring the state police to stay on. Mr. Chairman, Keenan Cook, State Police, we support the administration's bill.
Mr. Chairman, Josh Roberts, the Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence, we support the bill. I'll just be brief and say that while we've been talking about this over the last couple of years, the gun death rate and the homicide rate in Virginia in the last 5 years is up over 50%, and the gun suicide rate in the last 10 years is up 21%. We have a gun violence problem in Virginia. This committee is the committee that's supposed to deal with gun violence. I urge you to pass this bill to do something about gun violence.
Mr. Chairman, Kevin Howard, Virginia Catholic Conference, we also support the bill. We want to protect all human life, and we don't want to necessarily further restrict who can have a gun. We just want to enforce the current law, which is that convicted felons cannot possess a gun. We want that to be enforced in order to make sure that people aren't taking advantage of current laws.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Lori Haas, the Virginia State Director for the Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence. We certainly support the bill. We understand that universal background checks targets prohibited people. Those persons who are already prohibited under law. As we know, that federal law has prohibitions on a number of persons related to their criminal history, dishonorable discharge, drug use, domestic violence, mental health adjudications, and non-citizens. In addition, Virginia has additional prohibitions on persons who are convicted felons, individuals 29 or younger who are adjudicated delinquent and had a crime which would have been a felony, certain types of drug use, domestic violence, certain persons who have been acquitted by reason of insanity and committed to custody, also persons who have been involuntarily admitted to a facility, and those adjudicated legally incompetent or mentally incapacitated, and also minors, persons under the age of 18. These persons are prohibited by law, and yet we have circumstances where they're able to purchase firearms, certainly online, certainly through individual sales, and some of those take place at gun shows. So this background check bill is aimed at. Yes.
Question. When you purchase, Mr. Chairman, I have a question. When you purchase a firearm online, does that dealer not have to ship it to an FFL dealer where you undergo a background check?
If you're buying it from a seller who is a SFL, yes, you're correct, Delegate. But if you're purchasing it from an individual seller, of which there are many of those online, you can meet on the street corner and purchase firearms. I have it happens. We have instances of that happening.
So if, further questions, if I'm purchasing a firearm that's gonna cross state lines, does that firearm not have to go to an FFL dealer for a background check?
Yes, it does, you're correct. There's no way though for law enforcement to enforce that if they're not aware of the sale. If it's happening between two individuals and the seller is not licensed, he has no obligation. He has an obligation to send it to a federally licensed dealer, but no one is aware if he or she is doing that or not doing that.
Further question, Mr. Chairman?
Usually last question.
Last question. Would not law enforcement not be informed that two criminals were selling firearms amongst each other?
How would they be informed?
Exactly.
That's the point. At this point in time, they're not required to be informed. I believe sellers are good people. I believe that firearms owners are good people, and the majority are law abiding. And if they will follow the law, if we have a law that requires them to sell their firearms using and taking advantage of the Virginia Firearms Transaction Program, I believe they'll do it. I believe that the citizens of the Commonwealth, generally speaking, are law abiding and will follow the law. So we support the bill. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Gina Reeder, working mom from Chesterfield County. My point is, I think that all public-facing markets need to follow the same protocol. And there is enough precedent for that. If you have an e-commerce business, you have to respect patent laws, trademarks, copyrights, follow shipping restrictions, which means you can't ship ammunition, aerosols, follow age restrictions. If you sell vapor materials online, you're not allowed to sell that to a minor. There's licensing and permits that they have to follow. There is PCI compliance, which is to ensure that your online payment practice is secure, and there are rules in how you store data. So my point is, you have all of this level of compliance, and e-commerce businesses need to follow just like bricks and mortar, and the same should be with following the background check system if you're selling the same type of product. And furthermore, if you would like to pick and choose which public-facing markets can sell with a background check and cannot, and if you find a constitutional dilemma in that, then I challenge anybody here to put up a bill next year that just eliminates background checks altogether for all businesses and see how that flies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm Joanne Sweeney. I'm a political woman of Chesterfield County and beyond, and we strongly support this bill for all the reasons you heard here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to show their being in favor, please raise their hand.
Could I add one more thing?
I'm sorry, you've had your time.
I understand. I add one more
All
thing.
right, thank you very much. Those that are in opposition?
Chris Kopak again, representing the National Rifle Association, and we oppose expanding any background check systems because background checks don't stop criminals from getting firearms. Because some of these proposals would deprive individuals of due process of law, and we oppose any type of registration. Federal studies have showed repeatedly over and over again that persons imprisoned for firearm crimes often get their firearms mostly through theft, the black market on the street, and through friends and family through straw purchases. Background checks would do nothing to deter or change criminal behavior. With that, we oppose.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for the gentleman. Sir, if I go to a firearms, an FFL dealer, and I purchase a firearm, and then I take that firearm and I sell it to another individual, is that a straw purchase?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Weber, I believe so. What you described would be a straw purchase if your intent at the time of the purchase was to transfer it to somebody else.
Mr. Chairman, is that illegal?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Weber, yes, sir.
Further comment?
Philip Van Cleve, UCDL, yes, we completely oppose this. Universal background checks do not stop bad people from getting guns. Illinois is a classic example of this. They surveyed prisoners in prison for gun-based crime, and 97% of them did not go through a background check to get it, even though in Illinois, you can't have a gun unless you've got a firearm owner identification card, you've gone through background checks and everything else. What easy answer is a straw purchase, what we were just talking about. Person A gets person B who doesn't have a background issue, go buy a gun, and you can do this over and over. You go through all the background checks in the world, they still get their guns. Theft is another one. They break into, for example, gun stores. We've had some of that in Virginia, and they'll steal 40, 50, 60 guns. Those things are headed off to the bad guys, friends and family, things of this nature. By the way, the Missouri thing comes up every now and then. The crime rate in Missouri was climbing under universal background checks. When they got rid of the requirement for that, the rate kept climbing a little bit. It was already on an upward trajectory. It wasn't like down and suddenly it shot up and they got rid of universal background checks. So we strongly oppose. Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, Bob Sadler, South Redmond. I vehemently oppose the insertion of government into the transfer of my private property. Now, some folks may not sympathize, that's fine. But there are more practical issues. In most of the states where this has been rejected, one of the main reasons is the sheriffs throw up their hands and say, how am I supposed to enforce this? Am I supposed to track down every posting on the internet, chase every ad in the local recycle paper? Also, I'd like to correct a misstatement from earlier about 90 or 95, however many % of people wanting background checks. I will defer to Lieutenant Hook of the State Police, but we spoke about this earlier. And the voluntary background checks are currently running less than 2 per show. Now, if that equals 90%, that's some awful fuzzy math. I would like to close with a point of unity. For the first time in my life, I found common ground with Mr. Romans. I was born and raised in New Jersey, and it is a lot more depressing than Virginia. Gentlemen, don't use New Jersey as a barometer for anything. Thank you.
Anyone else would like to?
Aaron Lieber, National Rifle Association. I just wanted to point out that a private sale does not change any of the state or federal prohibitors on who is able to lawfully possess a firearm.
Hello, Mike Wilson. Adding the requirement to run a background check to an FFL for a private transaction is unfair and unnecessary burden on honest people. 2, this bill will not deter any crime because the requirement for mandatory background checks is not enforceable. Most importantly, universal background checks is the first step towards gun registration and confiscation. Please do not report this bill. Thank you.
Anyone else speaking in opposition? Yes, sir.
I also vehemently oppose the bill. I would like to say that in order for the security of a free state, the phrase is thrown about with the emphasis on security. I'd like for the consideration to be that the imposition is rightly on the word free. I oppose the bill because it's nobody's business. How I buy a gun is nobody's business. How I might inherit a gun, or I might be gifted a gun. It's a matter of freedom and nothing else.
And those in opposition that didn't speak, that would like to raise their hand, feel free to do so. Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, before you conclude, I'd like to just say a few words on behalf of the bill, since my bill is
Yes.
Is now the proper time?
That'll be fine.
Thank you, Mr.
Bill,
Chairman.
please.
So, in states that require background checks for all handgun sales, 47% fewer women are shot to death by their intimate partners. There are 53% fewer firearm suicides, and 53% fewer law enforcement officers are shot to death by handguns. So it's about double. These laws do work. They will decrease murders and suicides by 1/2. And that's what the statistics show, and that's why law enforcement strongly supports this. I hear all the time from gun rights advocates that the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Actually, these statistics show that the best way to stop a bad guy with a gun is don't let a bad guy have a gun. If you vote to pass this bill by, or you vote to table this bill by, let's be very clear what you're voting for. You're voting for giving guns to bad guys. Because background checks don't stop good guys. I have no doubt that all the gun owners in this room could pass a background check. And we know that most guns are sold from FFLs, from gun stores, and they have to pass a background check. And most guns are bought that way. The problem is not the legal people, the good people, the people that have owned guns, following the law. They are criminals. But a vote to pass this by is a vote to say, we want terrorists to have guns. We want the MS-13 to have guns. We just had an election where people said, what are we going to do about these gangs with guns? And now, if this bill's passed by, you're voting to give guns to gang members. You're voting to give guns to domestic violence abusers. You're voting to give guns to very dangerous people that none of us would want in this room with a gun right now. So I want to be very, very clear. This bill does not prohibit anyone who doesn't have this record of violence from getting a gun. And if you do have a long record of violence, or mental illness, or convictions for domestic violence, then I hope we would all agree you shouldn't own a gun. And I don't know why everyone on this side believes that people who commit domestic violence should have guns. I think that the laws say they shouldn't have guns, and to allow this loophole, it doesn't make any sense to not allow enforcement of the laws we have on the books. Otherwise, you're voting to give the bad people. It doesn't affect the good people. You're voting to give the bad people guns. Thank you for your time.
I'll have a final comment. I disagree with some of your comments very strongly. It's okay to have a difference of opinion, but to accuse someone of taking a certain vote and being in favor of guns going to terrorists and so forth, I resent that. I think you probably owe this committee an apology for those remarks. The rest of it, from
Mr. Chair, before you call for the vote, I would just like to make a comment and speak to the bill. Sitting on this committee now for over 11 years, and this bill has been brought before this committee regarding universal back check. We hear from both sides of the incidents of who opposes and who's for it, but people are constantly being killed. We are now in an environment as we look around is that children, adults, criminals have guns so readily available. And one thing that we can do to prevent this measure or be a deterrent to the wrong people having a gun is to certainly just passing a bill to have a universal back check. We're not taking the guns from individuals who have properly gone through the process, but we are trying to prevent the guns from going into the wrong individual's hands. And with people getting killed these days, this is just one basic law. A universal back check. Just completing a process. If you don't have anything to hide, you don't have to worry about the back check. You know, it's just, I just see this as going down the wrong road. And I hope as this committee goes forward, that we will begin to listen to the constituents, listen to the people who are concerned. We're not trying to take away your rights, but we're just trying to help save lives, and that's by getting guns off the street. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
If I could also say, and just kind of elaborate on your own comments, as someone that has a little bit more experience combating terrorism than a radio personality, I also don't appreciate the suggestion that if I disagree with somebody on this particular bill, it somehow insinuates that I want firearms in the hand of terrorists. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I have a motion.
You recognize.
Move to PBI, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Motion been made and second to PBI the following bills in a block: 140, 721, 977, and 1373. All in favor of PBI, let it be known by voting so, or cast your vote on the machine.
Again, clerk, my machine is not working. I vote yea.
I think it came up.
I didn't do it though. They had to do it.
All right, the bill is PDI 4-2. Now, Judge Plum, you've got 717. It's related, but it's a little bit different. I thought I'd give you a chance on that.
Well, I'm sure, I appreciate that. And I want to make it clear that I'm not here to do anything other than what we have already started down the road to. And that is the fact of having background checks. And we can argue about what the numbers are, but I think the facts are clear. Background checks do keep guns out of the hands of the people who are violent, people who shouldn't have those guns. And for law-abiding citizens, it's, as Lawyer Powers mentioned, a mere inconvenience that has happened. And so the bill that's here is the bill that's been crafted by the current administration. It does the same thing as the other bills that we have looked at previously, and I would hope that we could calm the waters a bit and take a look if we can't make a step towards what my constituents all over the place tell me, that we know there's no excuse the expression, so there's no easy solution. If you can make a step forward, progress towards reducing gun violence.
Look at what.
Perhaps this is for the patron staff. What are the differences between the last bill that you had and this bill?
Mr. Chairman, the difference between the last bills you voted on and this bill is this bill only applies to firearm shows, gun shows. So it only requires mandatory background checks at gun shows. So it's a much narrower version of the previous universal background checks.
Plum, like I said, I appreciate your remarks today, and since your bill, I'll still allow public comment. Your bill is very similar to the rest of them. If anyone in the audience would like to speak either way, I'll give you the opportunity.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to add to one point that I wanted to earlier. This is some delicate information that I want to give. So, in giving this information, I just ask people that can hear me for this not to leave this room. If you go on a computer and you type in 2215 Plank Road, Fredericksburg, Virginia, you'll be connected to a site called undergroundassaultrifle.com. Underground being a synonym for black market. On the title it says, how to build your own AR-15 ghost gun.
If you would please keep your remarks to the bill before us.
No,
discussing.
I will tie up the loose ends.
Just a second. Now, if you want to discuss, that's fine, but that's what the discussion is going to be about. We've had a lot of discussion on background checks, and this is what we're discussing now. So I just ask you to close your remarks. Okay, anyone else? Yes, sir.
Chairman, Andrew Goddard, Virginia Center for Public Safety. The Richmond Times Dispatch recently, a few days ago, reported that a very minimum estimate was 1,200 to 1,500 firearms are sold at 75 Virginia gun shows each year from people who have no federal license. So that's a very low estimate in my experience from the gun shows I've been to. But that's still 1,500 guns, which could fall into the hands of people who are not allowed by law to have them.
Mr. Chairman, thanks for Josh Horowitz from the Education Fund to Stop Gun Violence. Just make the point that technology, state police are doing this already. The technology has been effective in many other states. This is something we can do today, and it doesn't make sense to have some tables where there are background checks being done and other tables where there are not being background checks done. So I think this is a simple, easy way to make sure that everybody in a commercial situation, which is a gun show, goes through a background check to make sure that people who have convictions of felonies or domestic violence protective orders don't have access to firearms by going to the table that says, you know, it doesn't require a background check.
Mike? Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Kevin Maurer, Virginia Catholic Conference. We support, just want to point out that this does not apply to transfers between friends, acquaintances. It would only be at gun shows. Thank you.
Anyone else wants to speak in favor?
Hi, Nikki Zamosky, Assistant Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security. For all of the reasons already mentioned, the administration supports the bill.
Good afternoon, Lori Thomas with the Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence, and for all the reasons already discussed, we support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else would like to show their opposition by raising a hand or standing? In favor, beg your pardon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, are those in opposition?
Mr. Chairman, Chris Kopacki, National Rifle Association. Just want to point out one study that's very relevant to this topic. The Department of Justice's Bureau of Justice Statistics in 2013 looked at prison inmates specifically and examined where they were getting their guns from that they were using in crimes. And they found that less than 1%, 0.8% actually of prison inmates in their study bought a firearm from a gun show. Overwhelmingly, the majority of firearms were obtained again from family, friends, black market, off the street, and other illegitimate means. Opposed.
Anyone else? Okay. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, gentleman, Bob Sadler, South Richmond. I know gun shows better than anybody else in this room because I spent 5 years as Richmond's gun show coordinator. I know these things inside and out, and I spent years going around and talking to these people. And I can tell you for a fact that I never met a single soul who said, well, gee, I guess I'll have to let the government do a background check. I had a bunch of people tell me they wouldn't sell their guns at gun shows anymore, but the overwhelming sentiment was, I'll come in here, meet people, and if I find someone that's interested, gee, it's getting late, I'm gonna go to lunch, why don't you meet me back here in 45 minutes? Now you've got that transfer going through at the parking lot of McDonald's or CVS, the food line. Personally, I want that transfer done in the gun show, under the watchful eyes of local, state, and federal law enforcement. Thank you.
All right, anyone else that's opposed would like to raise their hand or stand, feel free to do so. Okay. Any comment from the committee?
First of all, this committee tends to handle some very emotional subject matter. So I applaud the chairman on maintaining the integrity of the committee. I would like to thank Delegate Plum for working on meaningful legislation. While I disagree with the policy because we have voluntary background checks at gun shows, and to quote somebody who had spoken earlier, a majority of gun owners and those that are selling at gun shows want to do the right thing, which is why they do occasionally utilize the service that we now provide. And with that, I have a motion, Mr. Chairman. I move to PBI the bill.
Motion's been made and seconded to PBI. Cast your vote on the voting machine. Has everyone voted?
Oh, wait, hold on, what does it say?
Oh, no, no.
Does it say pass by?
Doesn't say.
No, it doesn't say feedback.
Has everyone
Doesn't say
voted?
pass by, that's what I'm saying.
Wait a minute, Mr.
It
Chairman.
doesn't say recorded.
Does it say pass by on your deal?
It says
pass by. Alright.
Voice is passed by.
No, it's not letting me change it.
It doesn't like.
If we have trouble with machines, we'll have to do a voice vote. Is your machine not working?
It's not working again, Mr. Chairman, so, yay, I vote yes to pass by.
Okay. Well, let's just do a roll call. Start with you.
No.
Okay.
No.
Yes?
Yes.
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 Vote is 4-2. Mr. Chairman. Delegate Levine, from 41.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I mean no offense to this committee. I am passionate about this issue, but I certainly mean no offense.
Appreciate that.
So, whereas universal background checks, I guess I'll come to that. Whereas universal background checks is a very broad solution that I think would save a lot of lives, I fully admit that HB 41, a bill to ban bump stocks, is a narrow solution. And yet, any lives saved, to me, that's a plus. I fully admit that prior to October 1st of last year, I never heard of a bump stock, but I think the entire nation learned what happened, what bump stocks were when a gunman fired on a large group of people enjoying country music in Las Vegas. This one man, using bump stocks, was able to increase the firing rate of his semi-automatic weapon to 9 bullets per second, about 3 or 4 times what he could do without the bump stock, and ended up shooting more than 1,000 rounds in just 10 minutes. The carnage was severe. 600 people were shot, 58 people died, and I think had he only had a semi-automatic, he would have still done tremendous carnage. He would have done about 1/3 to 1/4 that amount of carnage. Only 150 people would have been shot. Only maybe 15 people would have died. But the bump stock quadrupled his kill rate. This is a bill that they considered at the federal level, and the NRA, the National Rifle Association, said at the time that it might be time to regulate bump stocks. Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House, said it might be time to regulate bump stocks. Now, I don't often agree with the NRA, and I don't often agree with Paul Ryan, but I agree with both of them that this is the kind of increasing the fire capacity of firearms that we don't need. Machine guns have been banned in the United States since the 1930s, ever since John Dillinger, Machine Gun Kelly, used to take them out in Prohibition times and shoot lots of people dead. The machine guns are regulated under a federal law from the 1980s. It's been around for 40 years. It's very, very hard to get them. You have to go through far more substantial background checks. It's actually very hard to get these weapons of war, and I think that's as it should be. We don't let citizens own tanks. We don't let citizens own anthrax. I think that these bump stocks are a simple loophole designed to evade machine gun laws. And I think that if even the NRA and I and Paul Ryan can agree that bump stocks shouldn't be legal, that this is a bill whose time has come. I will tell you this, I know that at least 2 states have passed a bump stock ban, and they passed it unanimously with no negative votes from Democrats or Republicans. So I hope you consider supporting the bill.
You're the only one here to testify.
I assume a number of people will say some things.
Well,
Oh, actually, there's one specific person I should mention. I'm sorry. This is Courtney Carroll, who was actually in Las Vegas on the day of the horrible incident.
My name's Courtney Carroll. I am a Route 91 Harvest Festival survivor, and I apologize if I get choked up. It's only been less than 4 months, so it still is with me every day. But I just want to share with you my story. If you'd asked my friends in September what words they would use to describe me, they would have said fun-loving, spontaneous, energetic, fearless, trusting, and always willing to try new things. I was a successful salesperson, a confident mother, a ballet dancer, and instructor. All of that changed the night of October 1st. I joined my boyfriend, my uncle, and my aunt to celebrate my birthday at the Route 91 Country Music Festival in Las Vegas. You see, my 2 favorite activities were dancing and going to country music concerts. It's my happy place. I'm the crazy girl who lines up early to stand in the front of the stage. On October 1st, when my aunt and I were singing along, in the front of the stage to Jason Aldean, the first single shots rang out. I mentioned the sound and everyone around me just assured me that it was fireworks. Seconds later, what sounded to me like machine gun fire that you could only imagine in a movie rang out. Seconds later, we crouched down. You see, we were packed in this venue of 22,000 people. There was nowhere to go. As I laid down covered by people, I kept thinking that this couldn't be happening. We only read this in the news and hear about this in stories. I prayed for my life and I prayed for my safe return to my children here in Richmond. The sounds of that night haunt me daily. The screams, the crying, the people yelling. After 5 rounds of shooting, which seemed like forever, there was a break. We ran. We ran and joined the crowd of people trying to get out of the exits. We spent the next minutes running for our lives and hiding behind cars for cover. While he reloaded, we hit a dead end and another shot rang out. We dove for the ground. At this moment, my aunt was hit. And she yelled out, "I've been hit!" I can't even tell you the horror of that night, the sound of the bullets ricocheting off the stage, off the ground, everywhere, and what it's like to see people bleeding, people shot, people murdered. And our night didn't end there. We had no idea where my uncle or my boyfriend were. We lost our phones. We took cover in a random building with 60 others as reports came of shooters all over Las Vegas. We hid on the bathroom floor for the next 5 hours. That horrible night, we lost 58 and over 500 were injured. That horrid monster that shot at us from his room on the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay, thank you. He fired using a bump stock equipped weapon, allowing him to change a semi-automatic rifle into essentially a machine gun. If bump stocks were banned, I truly believe we would not have lost so many that night. Yes, we would have lost some, but we would have had time to run and to take cover. He wouldn't have been able to fire 1,100 rounds in a matter of minutes. He purchased 55 firearms in a year, legally, and legally purchased the bump stocks. Since that night, I barely leave my home. I suffer from PTSD. We were untrained in a war zone. I struggle every day with anxiety, depression. I haven't been able to teach dance since, and I don't know if I'll ever go to another concert. The fun-loving, happy woman I was is gone, and every time I enter a building, I wonder where I would hide or where I would go if I saw a shooter came in. The first thing I did when I walked into this room is looked for the exits. I guarantee that most people don't do that, but that's the world I live in now. Do you know what it's like to live in fear 24/7? Because I do, and thousands of others do. I can't be in crowds, I jump at every loud noise, and it takes everything for me to be here today. And I am one of the lucky ones. Others are paralyzed, blind, living with bullets in their body. Something that might surprise you is I'm a Republican. I've come from a family of hunters. My boyfriend, who's with me today and was at the concert, is a hunter. He just purchased his first handgun and got his concealed carry. So I am not against the Second Amendment. I believe in guns. But I just don't think that these are necessary. I've asked him and I've asked other hunters if there was a need for bump stocks to be used in hunting or protecting yourself. And it's always a resounding no. We don't need them. Committee members, I'm asking you to think about my story. 200 mass shootings happen yearly in the U.S. There's no reason why we need to make it easier for those killers to murder more people. I beseech you to pass this bill and ban bump stocks. I assure you that just like you're probably sitting here thinking this will never happen to me, well, I'm here to tell you it can. And if not, think of your children, your family, your friends. What was supposed to be a night of fun, singing, and meeting new people, celebrating my birthday, turned into the worst mass shooting in modern history. Please don't let this happen again, and not in our state. Thank you.
Just 1 second.
Yes.
I want to thank you for coming forward, and I know we'll all be in prayer for you and everyone involved. And we're going to take this to just a moment of silence and the use of
Thank you.
Okay. We appreciate Lady coming today and the circumstances that she comes under. Anyone else would like to speak?
Mr. Chairman, Andrew Garrard, Virginia Center for Public Safety. This problem is in Virginia's hands because the ATF punted on making these devices part of the National Firearms Act. If these had been properly put into the National Firearms Act where machine guns already sit, any device that emulates a machine gun should also go under the National Firearms Act. But since they have not done that, I think it's in Virginia's best interest to do that and regulate where the ATF has decided not to. Devices that emulate machine guns by increasing the rate of fire have no real purpose in self-defense. In fact, if you read military sites, and I no doubt that a military person will tell me where I'm wrong, but the machine gun has, or a high rate of fire device like a machine gun, has the effect of being a suppressive fire machine. And I can't think of a civilian situation where you need to have suppressive fire.
Anyone else? Yes. Yes, ma'am.
So Lori House with the Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence, we support the bill.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Kevin Bauer, Virginia Catholic Conference. There are plenty of reasons why we should refrain from regulating firearms, Second Amendment, self-defense, hunting. None of those reasons apply to bump stocks. And Mr. Chairman, when it comes to saving lives, things like it's fun, I prefer it, it's my choice, are not sufficient reasons. Thank you.
Oh,
Yes, Lastly, Assistant Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security, the administration supports the bill.
and anyone else would like to raise their hands? You'll speak.
Gina Reeder from Chesterfield County. I just wanted to say that you've heard of a witness, a survivor from a mass shooting. The pain doesn't stop once the bullets stop flying. She mentioned PTSD. You've got PTSD. You have mental health issues. You have addiction. You have so many other disorders that happen when people survive these horrific incidents. So you wouldn't just be listen to her testimony, but think about the ripple effect that her experience is having on her family. Please consider her testimony when you go to vote in just a few minutes. And I hope that your heart and your conscience guides you to vote in favor. Thank you.
Okay, anyone like to raise their hand in favor? Okay, thank you. Anyone would like to speak in opposition?
Mr. Chairman, Chris Kopak again with the National Rifle Association. We currently oppose any state legislation that proposes a ban on these devices. Many of the proposals go farther than just banning bump stocks. Specifically, the language here is rather vague and could affect many other firearms accessories, especially those potentially used in competitions. The Obama administration approved the sale of bump stocks on at least 2 separate occasions. And to set the record straight of some information we've been hearing today, the NRA did ask the ATF to review whether these devices comply with federal law and never supported any type of ban. The ATF is still not responding to that. Again, we oppose.
Yes, sir.
Okay, please be CDL, yes, we oppose. Yeah, I mean, one might say the federal government is looking at it. I don't know if Virginia needs to do anything at this point anyhow. But, you know, I've got a video I put out, I sent it off to the Senate when they were considering it there. I took just a regular semi-automatic rifle out, unmodified, and bump fired it, just using my bare hands. It's only so fast that a semi-automatic can go. There's some physical limitations there. And that's why bump stocks were considered machine guns, because it can't approach the speed of a true machine gun. You don't need even a tool to do it. You can do it with your bare hands. Also, there was another video of somebody pulling the trigger on a semi-automatic as fast as he could alongside somebody with a bump stock. And they were firing the same number of rounds and began at the same time. They virtually ended in a dead heat. It's unfortunate that one person has took a bump stock and used it for evil. But we can't give up everything we've got every time one person breaks the law. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Bob Sadler, South Redmond. Miss Carroll's story enrages me. I despise anybody who takes their own misery out on other people. But I would hope that you would heed the advice your parents gave you that my parents gave me. Don't make decisions when you're upset. Step back, take a breath, analyze the situation critically. Despite some people's best efforts, this is still America. And in America, we do not punish the masses for the acts of the individual. We don't shutter the movie theater when some idiot yells fire during a movie. We don't padlock the ABC stores when some drunk kills a family of four. If we did, they'd never reopen. In a constitutional republic, we hold bad actors accountable, and we let free people live their lives as they see fit, in accordance with and under protection of the law. I would close with a practical matter. ATF is reviewing this right now. They are under punishing, relentless pressure, and I fully expect them to flip-flop. I would ask you, do you really want to take time out of a budget session to argue over a piece of legislation that will probably be moot by the time it hits the governor's desk, and certainly by the time it will be enacted? It might even be moot by crossing.